Devastation Evokers use the powers of the red and blue dragonflights to devastate their enemies and cause chaos across the battlefield with the power of flames. So, how are we going to play it in the War Within Season 1? We're going to jump straight in with the stats. I'm going to show you today everything you need to know, and that is going to be really beginner friendly if you're new to WoW, the class or the spec, while also giving you everything you need to know if you're a veteran. So our main priority stat is intellect. We're going to get this by getting a higher and higher eye level or item level of gear. And this is actually going to increase the damage done by our spells. We do have a secondary stat priority, which should be loosely followed, and that is what I would follow here. Now, what do these secondary stats do? Well, we have critical strike, which of course is going to give us a chance to do more damage. We have versatility. When you get this stat on your gear, we do more damage, we do more healing, but we also take less damage. It's a really great all-round stat. Mastery is actually unique to every single spec, and ours as a Devastation Evoker is a giant killer. Increases the damage of your spells by X amount percentage based on the current health of your target. Higher health targets take more damage. We have haste, increasing the attack speed and spellcasting speed of our spells. For example, with Living Flame here, the more haste we have, the quicker I can actually cast this spell, and any dots or damage over time spells on our enemies will actually tick their damage faster and faster. Now we can look at our... In fact, before I move on to the set bonus, again, I just want to reiterate that basically, if you are new, etc., or even if you're not new, just concentrate on getting a higher and higher eye level of gear, and you're going to be fine. That's really all you need to focus on to start with in this season. Looking at the tier set, 2 set, Disintegrate damage is increased by 10%, and Pyre damage is increased by 10%. So just 2 of our core spells in our rotation, it's increasing our... The 4 set, Eternity Surge cooldown is decreased by 5 seconds, and it now grants Essence Burst. Essence Burst is something I'll be talking about in quite a lot of detail shortly in the rotation section of this video, and so is Eternity Surge, so we're going to go all over that soon, but that is the set bonus we're getting in Season 1. So now we're going to be looking at some of the utilities and cooldowns and defensives that we have available to us as an Evoker in the War Within. So on the left here, this action bar, these are abilities that we're using to debilitate our enemies. And on the right, these ones are actually there to enhance us and our allies. So let's start off with what we're doing to our enemies then. Well, first up, we've got Sleepwalk. You can see here I'm casting this, disorienting an enemy for 20 seconds, causing them to sleepwalk around you. And damage has a chance, so it's not a guarantee, to also awake them. Then we have Landslide. You can see I can point this wherever I want, making a landslide, conjuring a path of shifting stone towards the target location, rooting enemies for 15 seconds that are caught with it, but damage again may cancel the root. Then we have Oppressing Roar. Any enemies caught in the cone that is emitted from this Oppressing Roar will actually have the duration of any crowd control placed upon them increased by 50%. So if you root them for 10 seconds and then use that, they're then going to be rooted for another 5 seconds, therefore 15 seconds, for example. And it will be for any crowd control applied to them in the next 10 seconds when you use Oppressing Roar. And lastly, we have Quell. This is your interrupt, otherwise known as a kick. And this is what we use to interrupt our enemies' spellcasting. It is extremely important to use this, and beginners and veterans alike often do overlook the importance of interrupting the enemy's spellcasting, whether that be in raiding, PvP, or Mythic Plus. Moving over then to the defensives and utilities we have to help us and our allies, we have Obsidian Scales. And you can see here I've got 2 charges of this at the moment. Reinforce your scales, reducing damage taken by 30% for 12 seconds. That's just a core defensive that we have. We then have Blessing of the Bronze. You should put this on before combat. It can be placed on you, your party, and your raid. And by that, I do mean that if you place it on yourself or just press the button, when you're in a party or a raid, it will also apply to everybody in that group. And what this does is it reduces the cooldown of any major movement abilities that your allies and you have by 15% for an entire hour. We then have another huge one, Fury of the Aspects. This is your bloodlust or heroism. Basically, This is going to increase the haste of all party and raid members by 30% for 40 seconds, and is generally considered the biggest cooldown in the game. Other classes also have it, and you can see I now have the exhaustion debuff. Now, if a mage uses their version, or a shaman uses their version, it does then mean that everyone has the debuff, and you can't then use yours. It is shared between the entire raid group. We have rescue, which I kind of can show you, but not really. You swoop to an ally and fly with them to a target location. So I can say this is where I want to fly to, and I click my ally or their raid frame, and I will rescue them to that location, taking them out of wherever, whatever they're in. And lastly, we have Cauterizing Flame. This is one of the best debuff removers in the game. You're going to cauterize an ally's wounds, removing any bleed, poison, curse, and disease effects, and healing them if it removes any effect. A lot of classes can remove like magic and disease, etc., but only very few can actually remove bleed effects. And this is why the Evoker is so amazing with their Cauterizing Flame. Now, you can choose other talents in your Evoker tree, and there are other bits and bobs in the Evoker spellbook, like Expunge, and there's a few others that you can look through. But I don't want to overwhelm you in this video, and these are the main ones that I think you really need to be aware of if you weren't already. And now for the fun bit, which of course is the rotation that we're going to be using. I do want to let you know we are going to be going with Scale Commander hero talents in both the raiding and M+ builds that I'm going to be showing you. And the rotation isn't that complex for a Devastation Evoker, so they're not going to change too much either. So having a look here then, we've got Deep Breath. This is what you're going to use as soon as you go into combat and pretty much use on cooldown. Taking a deep breath and fly forward, spewing molten cinders, dealing volcanic damage to enemies in your path, and it will remove any movement impairing effects while you're flying. So here we go, and oh dear, I've gotten a bit stuck there. But that is pretty much how it works. The other thing you're going to want to use when you go into combat and on cooldown is going to be Dragon Rage. Erupt with Draconic Fury and exhale pyres at 3 enemies within 25 yards. For 18 seconds, Essence Burst's chance to occur is doubled. And you gain the maximum benefit of your mastery regardless of their health. So if you're thinking, well, what is Essence Burst? Well, can you see under my character here, I've got 6 Essence. That is our main kind of resource as an Evoker. And here you can see we have something called Ruby Essence Burst and also Azure Essence Burst. So your Living Flame, a spell I'm going to show you, has a 20% chance to cause an Essence Burst, making your next Disintegrate or Pyre cost no Essence at all. So Essence actually regenerates itself on its own, and some of our spells will use it. When you get an Essence Burst, that is basically what is happening here, and the spell I just showed you on the action bar, which was Dragon Rage, means that your Essence Burst has a double chance of happening. So again, with Ruby, it's going to be that your Living Flame has a 20% chance to cause an Essence Burst, making your next Disintegrate or Pyre cost no Essence. And Azure Essence Burst here, Azure Strike has a chance to cause an Essence Burst, making your next Disintegrate or Pyre cost no Essence. If you don't know some of those spells, that's fine. I'm going to be showing you them as we go down the priority list. The next one is going to be Fire Breath, and this is actually something called an Empower spell. Inhale, stoking your flame, and then release to do a load of fire damage to multiple targets. And you can deal 176k damage instantly, and then another amount over 24 seconds. At Empower 2, it's more damage over 18, and at Empower 3, it's even more damage over 12 seconds. But you'll see that the amount we do up front is more, but over the course of time is less. And we're always going to cast Fire Breath at rank 1. Now, if you're not sure how to do this, if I click it, can you see it's ranking up 1, 2, and rank 3? We're always going to cast Fire Breath at rank 1. That is just the most efficient way to be using it. And we are going to be using our Fire Breath pretty much on cooldown. The only time when you don't want to use it on cooldown is if your Dragon Rage is about to become available so that you can use it within that window. After that, we're going to be using Shattering Star. Now, you'll notice here, when I use Shattering Star, that I do get an Essence Burst, meaning these spells are now going to be free to use. Shattering Star, exhale bolts of concentrated power from your mouth at 2 enemies for lots of Spellfrost damage that cracks the target's defenses, increasing the damage they take from you by 20% for 4 seconds. Now, I want to alert you to this talent here, Essence Attunement. Essence Burst can stack 2 times. So you've got it once guaranteed from Shattering Star, but maybe you'll get it from other chances from your other spells as well. So you don't want to use Shattering Star if you're already capped at 2 stacks of Essence Burst, because obviously that would waste your Essence Burst proc that you are getting from Shattering Star. Again, we're going to use Eternity Surge on cooldown. And you'll notice that the Empower 1, 2, and 3, it's going to damage 2, 4, or 6 enemies. Quite clearly, you're only going to use it at Empower 1 if you have 1 to 2 enemies, Empower 2 if you have up to 3 to 4 enemies, etc. So it really just depend on how many enemies you are facing for when you're using Eternity Surge. And you can see there that it's granted an Essence Burst. So if I then use Shattering Star, you can now see I've capped on Essence Burst, and therefore we don't want to be using Shattering Star again, like if it was obviously it's going to run out, but if it was available because we're capped. Then we've got Disintegrate. You're going to want to fully channel this. It's a beautiful spell. Tear into an enemy with a blast of blue magic, inflicting Spellfrost damage and slowing their movement speed by 50% for 3 seconds. And you'll also notice that your Living Flame will sometimes proc. And this is from something called Burnout. Fire Breath damage has a chance to cause your next Living Flame to be instant cast, and that can also stack as well. Now, if, again, we are not capped on Essence Burst, because Living Flame can trigger it, and we have a proc on our Living Flame, then we're going to use Living Flame at this point. We're only using it at this point if it doesn't have a proc, so more as a filler. So use it here if it has a proc, use it here if it doesn't. We're then using Disintegrate here if it has an Essence Burst, or if we are actually getting capped on our essence. You will notice that it actually costs 3 essence to use your Disintegrate. And what I should have mentioned on this one is we're only using it with Mass Disintegrate, which is this talent in the hero talents. Empower spells cause your next Disintegrate to strike up to 3 targets. When striking less than 3 targets, Disintegrate damage is increased for each missing target. So we're using it as a priority here, but then we're also using it here if we have any Essence Bursts, etc. And this here is the Burnout proc I was talking about. So we can use our Living Flame instantly at this point with the proc that we get. And now we've got an Essence Burst and we can use our Disintegrate. So you start to see how these are working into the rotation. And lastly, so we're using Living Flame here as a filler. And then lastly, Azure Strike. You can pretty much just use this on the move because it's an instant attack. So if you are on the move a lot and you haven't got time to cast other spells, you can use your Azure Strike. And that pretty much is the full single target rotation. So we're using Deep Breath on cooldown and Dragon Rage. We're using Fire Breath pretty much on cooldown at rank 1. We're using Shattering Star unless we are capped on Essence Burst. And we're using Eternity Surge, depending on how many enemies we have, on cooldown as well. Using Disintegrate with Mass Disintegrate from our hero talents, which I'll be going through in full shortly. Using any procs on your Living Flame here for Burnout. Making sure we're using any Essence Burst procs on our Disintegrate, and if we're capped on Essence, like we are here. And then we're using Living Flame as a filler if we've got nothing else to press. And then Azure Strike if we're on the move. A few other important talents. One is over here, Leaping Flames. Fire Breath causes your next Living Flame to strike an additional target per Empower level. So just an FYI on there. Obviously, I'm showing you the more single target rotation at the moment, and we don't care. But basically, just to show you, in case you are dealing with multiple targets in Raid, let's say I do it all the way up to Tier 3. Can you see here that I've got 3 stacks now of Leaping Flames? Your next Living Flame will strike 3 additional targets, and you can see it will bounce to other targets as well, whereas now it's only going to 1 target. So you can use it up to level 2 and 3 if you do have multiple targets for that reason, but generally still, I just use it at rank 1. Catalyze here is another interesting talent. While channeling Disintegrate, your Fire Breath on the target will deal its damage twice as fast, speeding up how quickly it does damage. And then there's Animosity, where casting an Empower spell, like your Fire Breath, will actually extend the duration of Dragon Rage by 5 seconds up to a maximum of 20 seconds. You may also notice Shattering Star obviously grants Essence Burst, but we already spoke about that. That's where the talent comes from here for that. Casting an Empower spell increases your essence regeneration rate by 100%, so it's going to regenerate a lot faster, so make sure you try not to cap out on essence because of that talent. And then we have Iridescence. Casting an Empower spell increases the damage of your next 2 spells of the same colour within 10 seconds, so, fire or arcane, etc. I'd say those are the main talents outside of the hero talents that you should be aware of. If we now go into the Mythic Plus build, you can see only a few of the talents are actually changing. So now looking at the actual AoE rotation that we're going to do for multiple targets, generally suited more towards M+, or Mythic Plus, we're still using Deep Breath, and we're going to be using this outside of our Dragon Rage. Then we're going to be using Shattering Star, unless you are capped on Essence Burst, of course. After that, we're going to use Dragon Rage on cooldown. And then we are actually using our Fire Breath at maximum rank in Mythic Plus, okay? And the reason for that is going to be pretty much the Leaping Flames that I spoke about before. So now you can see that Living Flame will hit 4 additional targets. And obviously in M+, that is something we're going to be doing quite a lot. On the bosses, you don't need to worry about that if it's a single target boss. But on the trash, that is going to be really helpful for maximizing DPS and doing AoE damage. Again, then it's going to be Eternity Surge, depending on how many enemies you've got. Like if you're doing a boss, obviously just at rank 1, whereas if you have 8 enemies near you, then you would go up to rank 4. Then we actually have a spell we're not using in single target, but we're only using in Mythic Plus, and that is Pyre. Lob a ball of flame, dealing fire damage to the target and nearby enemies. And we specifically want to use this with some charge of something called Charged Blast. Your blue damage increases the damage of your next Pyre by 5%, and that can stack 20 times. Generally, I would say get this at least above 10 before you use your Pyre, ideally 12 to kind of 15 levels. So you can see here, if I use Eternity Surge, I'm now going to get 2 stacks because it hit 2 targets of Charged Blast. Then if I use my Shattering Star, which also hits another 2, it's going up. And you can see here, Charged Blast is slowly going up and up. So now you can see that my next Pyre will deal 60% more damage. And you can see the numbers do actually appear on the tooltip as well. So it's really easy to actually see that on your action bars. After your Pyre, you do want to channel your Disintegrate to spend your Essence and do channel the entire thing. So I put Living Flame there, I actually meant to use Pyre. You can also use Pyre at this point in the priority list without the massive stacks on Charged Blast. But if you do have an Essence Burst, just to be aware of that, that is where we're going to be using it. And then after that, pretty much we can be using, again, our Living Flame, especially with our Leaping Flames over here that I discussed before. And again, Azure Strike on the move. There is one other talent I want to let you know about with Azure Strike, and that is Protracted Talons here, where Azure Strike damages an additional enemy as well. So you are going to be hitting more than one enemy in this build if you are on the move and having to use Azure Strike as well there. And that's pretty much it for the Mythic Plus rotation, so or AoE rotation. So now let's get on to the hero talents we're going to be using. So for this build, we are going with the Scale Commander hero talents. Now these are available to both Devastation and also Augmentation. Let's have a look then. So Scale Commanders are natural born leaders capable of inspiring those around them to become better. They are chosen generals of the Drakfir and use the Empower spells to send battle commands and summon troops. So we start off with Mass Disintegrate. Empower spells cause your next Disintegrate to strike up to 3 targets. When striking less than 3 targets, its damage is increased for each missing one. Okay, so passive increase there. Going down the left side, you have Might of the Black Dragonflight. Black spells do more damage. Melt Armor, Deep Breath cause enemies to take more damage from bombardments and essence abilities. Cool. First choice node, Menacing Presence. Knocking enemies up or backwards reduces their damage done to you. Interesting there. I think this would be good in Mythic Plus, PvP, very specific situations. Otherwise, we just have Hardened Scales, which is what I would, being lazy, go for in most situations where your Obsidian Scales cooldown just reduces more damage taken. And I think this is a lot easier to use, you know, in the moment when you need that damage reduction. Going through the middle, we've got bombardments. Mass disintegrate marks your primary target for destruction for the next 10 seconds. You and your allies have a chance to trigger a bombardment when attacking, dealing volcanic damage split amongst all nearby enemies. And again, from this talent here, I just want to remind you from Melt Armor, Deep Breath causes enemies to take more damage from bombardments and essence abilities. We've got Wing Leader. Bombardments reduce the cooldown of Deep Breath for each target struck. Another choice node, Extended Battle. Essence abilities extend bombardments, or bombardments have a chance to generate Essence Burst. Now, I think Extended Battle is better because it kind of will actually affect everyone, especially if you're Augmentation. It's a support class. You know, Devastation, basically, do you want to be selfish or selfless? Diverted Power is going to help you specifically. Extended Battle, I do think, will overall do more damage because it's helping you and your allies. Onslaught, entering combat grants a chance of burnout, a charge of burnout, causing your next Living Flame to cast instantly. Lovely. For each second during combat, Azure Strike, Living Flame, and Disintegrate deal more damage. And then we've got our last node choice, Slipstream, where Deep Breath resets the cooldown of Hover, or while hovering, damage taken from area of effect attacks is reduced. I like Slipstream because I like getting my movement speed cooldowns off cooldown as quick as possible for when I next need to use them, and that's why I like Slipstream. Lastly, we have Maneuverability. Deep Breath can now be steered in your desired direction, which I love, and in addition to that, Deep Breath burns targets for X amount of volcanic damage over 12 seconds. They're really quite straightforward talents on Scale Commander, really just kind of enhancing our support. And Bombardments is a nice little addition, adding DPS to us and our allies passively. Finally, looking at the consumables we're going to be using, you will notice these Nerubian Gem Weavers. First off, looking at enchants and what we're adding to our gear. So these are the new weekly Vault items where you can add a socket to your gear on the head, wrist, and waist. And you'll also see Magnificent Jeweler's settings. You can add 2 to your neck and each ring, and this is adding 2 sockets to each piece of jewelry. Chant of Winged Grace on the back is going to be an avoidance and lessening of full damage enchant. Crystalline Radiance will be primary stat. Avoidance on the wrist. Sunset Spellthread gives primary stat and also stamina on the legs. Scout's March is the movement speed on the boots that you'd come to expect. Putting Mastery on the rings, you can put haste or crit depending on your exact circumstances with your secondary stats and stat priority, especially if you're simulating your character, but generally, Mastery, etc. is going to be fine. And then the Authority of Radiant Power is going to be on your weapon enchant. Basically, sometimes when you're doing damage, you will do an extra amount of radiant damage on your target and also increase your secondary stat by about 1700 for I don't know how long. It just says temporarily on the tooltip of the enchant. But there we go. So sorry about that. Actually haven't got a bloody clue. And then on the consumables, I would just go for the Tempered Versatility, personally, over the Mastery Flask. It's just a more general increase on both damage and defensives. Feasts, obviously, are the best option. And then Tempered Potion will increase your secondary stats. Specifically, it's going to increase the one that isn't being used on your flask. Healing Potion is your healing potion. Mana Oil can add crit and haste. I would go with the Algari Mana Oil. That's what adds crit and haste. Crystallized Augment Rune increases primary stat. And then the gems are a bit interesting. Culminating Blasphemite. It actually adds primary stat, but it also will add a little bit of critical effect per different coloured gem you're using. So if you use, like here, an Onyx, a Ruby, an Emerald, and a Sapphire, you'll get 0.60% critical effect, whereas if you only use one colour, you only get 15. So you do want to use all 4 colours, and then after that, use whichever colours you would like, depending on your stat priority. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in The War Within Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in The War Within as well. I am doing all classes and specs for the War Within, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for War Within Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the plater profiles, the voodoo, the LVY, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.